Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. And in this video we are going back to the 1980s. What you're looking at are not actually 1980s Games Workshop Space Marines. These are the Star Rogues from bequest Miniatures. I've followed them for quite a while on Instagram, and a few months ago they did a Kickstarter for this 10 strong squad of very retro models. So I backed them. Now the Kickstarter was fulfilled by Hagen Miniatures. That's where you can get these models. I'll put a link down below. They're not available till December. Because the Kickstarter backers get them early, but if you fancy them, links below. I also picked up a squad of 5 Beaky Marines, which I'm sure I'll feature on the channel on my Instagram at a later date. So what do you get, or what did I get in this Kickstarter? Well, it's a 10 strong squad. These are hand sculpted, these are spun cast in white metal and come with a ton of retro vibes. So you get 10 models, you get a sergeant, you get a heavy weapon trooper, specialist, and the rest were bolt guns. Now this one here is Schenker. All of these models have a name, which is fantastic. Very much like Games Workshop used to do it. I think Schenker is the lead guitarist of the Scorpions. I'm not 100% sure. Although Eddie Vedder is in here. I'm a Pearl Jam fan, so that's going to be my favourite because of that. So you get these 10 models, and they are fantastic. Look, I was around in the day when 40k or Rogue Trader first launched. My first Marines were bought in metal, and these really do give you that vibe of being that collector at that time. They are hand sculpted, like I said, which gives benefits and certain things that are frustrating about some hand sculpting models, which we'll talk through. So here I'm test fitting the heavy weapons onto the trooper there. 3 different heavy weapons to go on the shoulder. And in the end, I picked the one that I think looks like a missile launcher, and they are look lovely little pieces. Some of the foibles you'll get when you're building metal models is trying to work out what the parts are for a start. These are the 3 pieces that go onto the special weapon trooper. We'll see later. You get a flamer, a plasma, and a melter. And when you're testing these and looking at them, you will see faults. So you'll see that the backpacks don't necessarily fit properly onto the things. You will look at and go, hang on, that gun's a bit smaller on that model than it is on the other model. The hands might be different sized, or the legs might be a different thickness as you're going through. But that's how all models were when they're hand sculpted. And to be honest, it's perfectly understandable, because an actual human has sculpted these with their own hands and a sculpting tool out of green stuff, rather than it being CAD designed or done on a 3D system. So if you like retro vibes, that's what you're going to get. If you're one that wants absolute perfection in the casting and sculpting and things of their models, well, probably not going to be for you. But I would urge you to give it a go, because it's a different style of model. It's a different style of painting when you come to do them. And there is just that bit of joy involved in these models. Like this guy, the sergeant, how he's ever going to fit the helmet onto his head, Lord only knows. But I absolutely love it, and that's what you've got to bear in mind. It is like going back to those days. Now, I had the joy of, when I say joy, going through the early days of 40k and Games Workshop and miniature wargaming in general, or some of the early days. It's good fun just to revisit that and go back to it and remind yourself and have that joy from days when models were done because of the kind of the love of it and the fun, rather than being really to fit a sales purpose. So take a look at them. So these are the 10 strong squad. Some things to think about when you do it. When I pick them up, there is some residue on the models from whatever it is, so I did give them a thorough cleaning, soapy water and whatever, before drying them off. I test fitted all the parts and worked out kind of how the backpacks are going to go on, what I might need to do differently. Now I am going to mount them on 32mm bases, so I can use them as current Space Marines in my army. So I'm just doing the bases with a Green Stuff World roller here, milli put onto the base. Now I was rushing these because I'm doing these as a side project alongside my Titan, which I'm working on at the moment, and I didn't leave enough time for the milli put to sort of start to harden on the base before rolling them. Bit of a rookie error, a bit of a mistake, but we can work around mistakes. But just think about that here as I am going through these fairly quickly, making my excuses for why the bases went wrong. So I'm basing them up to 32mm. Now I'm chopping off the sprue bits that come on the bottom of the feet, because they're meant to go into slaughter bases. Another point to think of: when you're cleaning up metal models, you don't necessarily use an edge scraper. You are going to need to use like a metal file, because it's a little bit tougher than getting edges off a plastic model. And the other thing to remember is you are going to get little specks of metal all over your table, so make sure you clean that up as you go in and clean it off your hands, so you don't get kind of irritation or get it in places you don't kind of want. Now it is white metal, so it is safe ish. Obviously shards of metal are never going to be perfectly safe, but it's something to think about as a difference between building these old school retro models and a current modern plastic Space Marine. Super glue and milli put to stick them down. Oh, sorry, not milli put, green stuff. So a little bit of green stuff onto the feet, mixed in with that super glue piece there, and then I'm just using a sculpting tool to make sure that green stuff isn't spilling out. Now this will set the models rock solid. I've also done the same on the backpack. There's a blob of green stuff in there, and I've taken the little nubbin off the backpack a little bit so it presses against the body a little bit cleaner. Now onto the basin. This is a little pot full of sand and bits of old plastic and slices of bits of resin and little bits of interesting models that I've snippered off, and really just gluing that down with PVA glue onto the base to give kind of an urban industrial base, and that's what I was kind of going for. So, you know, that green stuff with roller is a kind of mesh base. It's done. So I'm kind of doing these as though they were maybe boarding a spaceship, or they're fighting in a factory or something like that. So just something different to go on the bases. So they're not quite the same as my previous Death Guard army. I wanted to do something a little bit different, and again, it was an interesting side project. Now I'm going to get excuses in here for why some of the filming footage isn't great. I am testing a new camera, a new mount, a new set of lights, so this was a bit of a test video, and this was really just again a side project from my Titan. Now this isn't going to really be about the actual paint scheme. What I'm doing is I sprayed black, I sprayed a desert yellow, and I'm doing 2 layers of dry brush, so I'm going for bone white and off-white, and I'm trying a different way of doing a pre-heresy Death Guard colour scheme on here. How I've done my Death Guard traditionally, my pre-heresy ones anyway, is a black spray and then a silver spray, and then I've painted on the bone white armour colour before doing the wash days. I'm doing it the way around here, so I'm not painting the bone white armour or you know, by hand. I've sprayed kind of that on and done a couple of layers of dry brush to kind of speed it up. So but the actual colour scheme in the background isn't really the point of the video, but you can, you know, take an eye as I waffle through the painting technique. Now I'm actually painting here the silver, so I've done it on the ends of the guns, and I've done it on these kind of speaker grills that's on the model, and that's going to be one of the first things you notice when painting these models. The barrels of the guns are different sizes on each gun, only slightly, but they are different. You know, the speaker grills that are into the front of the armour are slightly different sizes on each model, only slightly, but slightly different. And that's the joy you'll get when picking up each model. You can see the character in each of these models. You know, you can see that an actual human has sculpted them, like when I'm painting the packs on the back here, they're all slightly different sizes. And that is joyful in that you can see a human's been involved in it, you can see a human has physically done this, and it adds a real level of character to these models in that everyone is slightly different. They've all got the same elements, but they're all going to be slightly different sizes perhaps, and a slightly different pose and whatever. Now that might drive you mad if you are a real fan of the current very homogenised Space Marines with not a lot of detail on, and everything is identical. This might drive you mad that every model is slightly different. You've got a slightly different size to paint. You know, you might need to drop from one paintbrush size to a smaller brush to get the rivets that are on the back of the knuckles or the rivets that are down the chest. You know, you might have to drop a brush size to get into that detail because it's slightly smaller on the next model. But for me, it's joyful, and it was really fun to paint. There's lots of nice detail on these. I've talked about it in a video before where I've gone and compared a modern Space Marine Terminator captain with an old school Space Marine Terminator captain, and in that I talked about how there's way more detail on the old models, and I'd say the same on these compared to a new fairly clean Space Marine. There's a lot of detail on these models, a lot of interesting intricate things, you know, grenades, pouches, packs, and that is just a different painting experience. The other thing that's different painting experience is paint sticks differently to metal models. Now that might just be in my head, but I'm sure it does, and how you lay the paint down is slightly different. It takes differently. You've also got to be a little bit more careful when you are painting because paint will chip off a metal model easier. Now at the end of this whole process I do varnish my models, and these will be gaming models, so you know I'm not babying them or anything like that. No paint's come off them as yet, but you've just got to bear that in mind that metal models do handle paint differently, and how you treat them afterwards is going to be differently. How the ridges and the lines and the things take the paint and hold the wash is slightly different, and a real fun thing to just have a go at. So you see I've gone through the paint stages there, I've put a wash layer on, and I'm just using here all the same colours I've already used to paint these. Now if I was doing these again for the channel, I'd probably do them in a bit more of a bright and vibrant colour, because you know, doing them in that kind of dull washed down grimdark that I quite like probably doesn't give the original 80s 90s vibes to the model, because back in those days there wasn't really grimdark washes. It was more about, you know, vibrant pops of colour and edge highlighting and those things. And edge highlighting actually is a joy on these models, and I'm correcting a mistake there where I put a bit too much paint on for the edge highlight. There are lots of edges and gaps and cracks and things, so really to practice those techniques it is great fun. And really that's what this video is about, and really that's what our models and our hobby should be about. These models are amazing fun. They are a big retro kick going back to the 80s and 90s, and I absolutely adored them. And like to stress, look, I'm not being asked to do this and gush wildly about these models. They really are just lovely. So I'll put the links down below if you do fancy picking some of those up. Give myself and bequest Miniatures a follow over on Instagram and check them out. And I hope you've enjoyed that kind of blast from the past and that chat through some what I think are stunning retro models. So I hope you enjoyed that. Hopefully I'll see you again on the channel.